your ass above the couch. Something isn't right in your head. Maybe it's a mad world. Instead, you've got a malignant brain humor. Just as you need, Mike Bledger. Hey folks, welcome back to Malignant Brain Humor. I'm your host, Mike Bledger. On this week's podcast, I've got Jim Gaffigan. I don't think I need to tell you how funny he is. Chances are you found this podcast from your love of him. Statistically, I think that Jim has a slightly bigger fan base than me, provided that you do not count my extended family, which is how I refer to all of the human race. I care about you guys. I met Jim and his wife Jeannie when we were all in Israel at the same time a couple years back, and they are just about the sweetest people that I have ever met who do not have diabetes. They're very sweet humans. I would describe them as menches, is the Jewish word for it, and I think that's appropriate. This episode is split into two segments because the conversation was very clearly divided. The first half here, it's a bit more than half, is all about comedy, and it's about the changing media landscape and some sort of comedy nerd things. And the second half, which I'm going to release at the same time, is about religion, or at least about the conversation about religion. I won't describe that as much here. I'll intro that in that one. This one comes first, so if you want to have a sense of the full conversation, just keep on listening and then switch on over. I gotta say, on a personal level, it's really cool for me to have gotten to interview Jim for my podcast. Before I even started to think about doing stand-up, actually when I was in high school, there were two comedians who I really loved, and one was Mitch Hedberg, and the other was that weird pale guy from Middle America. I don't know that I really had a sense of who Jim was, but I distinctly remember thinking to myself about whether I wanted to do comedy or not. And I looked at a lot of stand-up and I was like, I don't really like this. I don't really like this. And then I saw Jim's stuff and it was just so smart and so funny and so just incisive, and I'm just going to use a bunch of redundant terms, but it wasn't redundant. It was just broad and comprehensive, which is another word for Catholic. That's the original meaning for that word, so I'll put that in the religion side. But yeah, Jim just has such an excellent way of sort of taking little experiences that people have and summing them up, but also bringing a kind of bizarre absurdity to the world. So like a true artist, right? You show the people something they know, but you show it to them in a way that is new and fresh. And I really feel like his work doesn't just represent things; it really adds his spin, and it's just I don't know. I don't need to tell you how good Jim is, because, if you're listening to this, you probably have a huge amount of respect for him. Or you're my mom, and then you have a huge amount of respect for me and my taste. Either way, I'm okay with it. I guess I'm just saying that, to me, the joke is a beautiful form. It has an elegance and a simplicity and an efficiency to it that sort of mirrors like Nietzsche's writing. He writes in aphorisms, little chunks, or Zen, Buddhist koans. Jokes are like koans or Nietzsche's writing, and a lot of other comedians are more like longer form philosophers. And I just, for me, and what I love, I love all kinds of comedy, but what I write in, what I feel is the most in my heart. And Jim is one of the contemporary masters of this form. It's like, it's a tricky thing, folks. When you
interact with somebody who is clearly on a higher threshold than you, both artistically and professionally, and because you are both aware that there is a some kind of power dynamic involved in that interaction, and you don't want to just be a fanboy. Yeah, you never do. Even though I have this kind of affection for his work, but I think that just because Jim is a very personable person, and I am not one to get sucked into this sort of fanboy mentality. I try to engage on a human level, and it was really easy with Jim and Jeannie. They're very sweet people. I don't know what to tell you. It's the nicest thing when you're able to talk with somebody who you have that much respect for, but it's just talking. It's just talking with another person, and I guess I want to remind myself and encourage anybody who listens to this, that when you do interact with people who fall within whatever your mythological pantheon is, depending on your field, depending on your interest, maybe you are in somebody else's mythical pantheon. It could be both ways. And I just, both of you do your part to look past that and just engage as a human being. We should all be so lucky. All right, folks. Enjoy part 1. I'll talk to you again shortly before part 2. Take it easy. 2 quick things before we get started. One is just because of the recording situation we were in, there's some table noise on this, so it's a little bit lower quality in some senses than some of my previous episodes and some of my episodes to come, but the content more than makes up for that. And the other thing is just the occasion under which this is being published. By the time this reaches your ears, Jim's new album and DVD, Mr. Universe, will be available online at jimgaffigan.com. I can't recommend it enough, guys. He's doing a $5 release with $1 of each going to a charity to help veterans. That's pretty cool. We talk a little bit about it on the podcast, so I won't say too much about it. But man, if there were ever a case where you should not pirate a thing and just give the person the money, this would be it. Stop taking money from veterans, you jerks. Give him the money for the jokes. Give it to him. All right. Pockets, manatees, bacon, whales, and tons of cheese.
So how many, to me it seems like most of the podcasts happen in LA.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely more of a podcasting scene in LA than New York.
Yeah.
Which I think, I don't know if there's more of a scene. I think more of the famous podcasters are in LA. And maybe part of that has to do with, just the people out there. Mark Maron is out there, and then he got his stuff from Jesse Thorne, who is out there. Maybe in San Francisco.
So Jesse Thorne was a big influence for...
Yeah, Jesse Thorne's been a big influence for the podcasting world, I think, even though his show started out as a college radio show, but then he moved to podcasting, and I just know he set up Marin, and I think he helped a couple other guys.
Wow. That's interesting. I've done Jesse's show.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I think I did listen to that at some point. It was a while
It was a live show.
Mm.
The thing is with live shows, I don't think live shows are... I think...
They're never as good.
They're never as good.
Which, actually, did you see, what's his name? The Scottish comedian.
Craig Ferguson?
The Scottish comedian, yeah. Craig Ferguson. He did a show with Stephen Fry where he had no audience
really?
in the show, and it was way better. But, of course, they immediately went back to having an audience. Because when it wasn't an audience, it was like them just talking as humans, and it allowed for it to have a more sort of nuanced feel to it before it was like, oh, we got to get the next laugh.
Yeah.
And in some senses that allows more deep laughs, I think.
Yeah, it's, I did Nikki and Sarah's,
Oh, I love their podcast.
and there were maybe 8 people in the room, and that was great.
Yeah.
Like, if you have too many, it's a really
Because it's a
interesting
show.
thing.
It's sort of this difference between, like, when is it a show and when is it a conversation.
Right, and it was definitely comedy nerds like us in the audience. So it was, you didn't have to explain a reference. The sarcasm was not lost on anyone.
Yeah, actually, I can always hear, not always, but
What
I've
is this
heard
pen you have there?
This is, I was waiting for you to ask. This is an electronic pen.
Yes, and it transcribes it onto your computer.
Yeah, well, it takes pictures of everything that I'm writing. So it has, like, just photos of the pages, which I have all on my phone and on my computer. And then it also, there's a program which then transcribes that into text, like typed text.
Holy shit.
And then it also records the audio while I'm writing, so that if I touch a place where I wrote something when somebody was speaking, it'll play what was being said at the time when I wrote that.
Holy shit.
And it'll kill your kids. So,
oh my God.
It's got a full program.
Now, what is, if there was an overall tone of this that you would want to achieve? I mean, I know you.
Yeah.
I mean, you're kind of you're a thinker. You want to get into the.
I just wrote down today. I don't know if this has been said before, but I wrote a log line for myself that was like the drinking man's philosopher.
Right.
So like.
Yeah. No, it's there's sincere curiosity. I think it's absent of pretension. Right.
Yeah, well, I mean. If it is not, then it is at least self-aware of its pretension.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I know that. Okay. I mean, actually, here's another example. I smoke an electronic cigarette.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
People think, I never smoked cigarettes.
Yeah, but you're getting. I mean, it's not smart, but
no, exactly. It's like I guess my point is that, like, people are like, that's douchey, and I'm like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Like, I don't, like, I love words, I love ideas, I love sort of, getting into why people think what they think and how their process works and how their mind works. And I get that some people don't, like, some people think it's too jerky or too mathematical or too analytical. It's one of those things, it's like, it takes all the magic out of it. And I'm like, well, that's, I'm not saying my way is the only way. I know people who are way funnier than me who don't analyze everything to, infinity.
Yeah, it's not as if we're going to figure out an equation for comedy.
Exactly.
It's fun to talk about it.
Exactly. And I think that this is actually something I did want to talk with you about, because I think that as a joke writer, you are more susceptible to that attack. I think that people who are joke writers tend to get... sort of labeled as like the mathematicians of comedy.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's first of all, let's start from the premise of stand-up.
Sure.
Okay, the premise of stand-up is not undifferent from the premise of a late-night talk show. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I think Craig Ferguson is deconstructing that a little bit by tearing up his cards, right? Mm-hmm. But we have this idea that, Don Rickles is going on, and by the way, Jimmy Kimmel, they all try and deconstruct it.
Yeah.
But these, we have this notion that it's Johnny Carson and his friends, and maybe he's introducing someone new. He's discovering someone. But the reality is those talk shows, any talk show, any morning show segment is prearranged.
Yeah, and in many cases, very carefully scripted.
Very carefully scripted.
Yes.
And so, which almost highlights why the Sarah Palin thing was such a disaster. But the whole thing is that, so then, all right, so let's take that knowledge, and then let's go back and let's look at stand-up comedy. Mm-hmm. Okay? I am, I did a show, and Ricky Gervais was like, you're just telling jokes. And I am telling jokes, okay? It is from my point of view. But there, let's also include the Mike Daisy thing, know?
Yeah.
Okay? Like, I kind of laugh about that. Now, the fact that it became where they used it as a news story is absurd. But the fact that storytellers are lying is something that a performer, a writer-performer, knows immediately.
Of course.
I love Tom Shalhoub, but I know that he is making up some aspect of his story.
Sure.
And I know that, Chris Rock is making up some aspect of his story. Louis C.K. is making up some aspect of his story.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a more advanced, a more difficult thing? Possibly. Most definitely, for me, it would be more difficult. But whether it's Dave Chappelle or, Richard Pryor, these were not all real things. There's exaggeration. There's comic exaggeration.
Pryor wasn't even black.
There's reordering of the timing of events. There's stealing stories from other friends. I'm not saying other comedians, but it's like stuff that didn't happen to them. It's like Louis even admitted that his everything's fine and everyone's
happy.
Yeah. He admits that he was the one that was angry.
Yeah, well that's because it's the distinction between factual and true.
Right.
There are things that are true that are not factual.
Right.
Because and it's not hard to understand that in any other art form. Nobody looks at Picasso and goes, "That's not what a person looks like."
Right, exactly.
That's not right. No, it's like that's impressionistic. Or, I may be totally wrong about that, but it's that's a point of view. That's a way of expressing a truth that is consistent and true to him, that people understand without having to be like, but that's not exactly how it happened. But for some reason, and I think it's because we normally talk, we normally joke around, and normally when somebody is talking and joking around and telling you a story, you're assuming that it's all just true the way that it happened. And so we just put that on to comedians.
Right. Well, there's also, the basic premise of a comedian, the naive belief, is that they're making it up as they go along.
Yeah,
People believed for years that Robin Williams, who is very funny, improvised his entire Live at the Met. They actually believe that.
Which doesn't give them a lot of credit or it doesn't give him a lot of credit for thinking he's smart. Like, that would be the stupidest thing to do.
I heard there was a rehearsal, and he was like, and then I'm going to go into the audience at this point. You have to do that so that the camera people know to follow you.
Yeah, that's a very funny point.
I'm not saying that, when Bill Murray's on Letterman or on Conan and he decides to go into the audience, the camera guy doesn't follow him. But I'm just saying that there's some bullshit going on here. There's some bullshit about
artifice.
There's also stand-up has such a rich tradition of censorship. And so we, with every generation of stand-up, I think, attaches an identity. And, I'm sure, like you and I would enjoy the nerd analysis of this, but how, like, supposedly during bad economic times, pop songs are really, really successful, really empty pop songs.
Yeah, because people want to escape.
But during good economic times, Nirvana's gigantic.
Right.
And so the whole thing is that I think that the identity of comedians, by the way, we are, when I started stand-up in the 1850s, it's the stand-up comedy has become incredibly, mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It used to be a rarity for it to even be on television. And if it was on television, there was some, there was a lot more bad comedians, I think.
Well, there are probably more as a base number of bad comedians now, but as a proportion of the overall population,
right?
Yeah, then there were probably way more bad comedians.
And the price of entry of being a comedian
you had to give up more of your life.
Was much more. It was a more difficult task.
Sure.
Like I think when I started, it's saying that you were going to be a comedian. It was more or less the equivalent of saying I'd like to visit the moon. It was a little bit of like, okay. It was I'm sure there are some people that do that, but the stand-up comedian is before the rich history of Lenny Bruce and George Carlin, if you go way back, before
It's
Mark Twain.
It's vaudeville. It's
it's
the Borscht Belt.
and before that,
then, the
it's
writers.
the court jester.
Yeah.
It's the boob. It's the outcast. It's like, see the movie Pele the Conqueror. It's the clown.
But of course, even in Lear, the jester is the only one who's allowed to speak honestly to Lear.
Right. Even during those times, I think he was. There's a belief that the jester could speak honestly, but that kings were killing jesters for being too honest.
A lot of dead jesters. I think they just didn't know because they had their faces.
But so I think there's this rich history of censorship, and the fact that I am not a participant in that censorship, which Bob Newhart wasn't.
Yeah.
Jerry Seinfeld wasn't.
That's one big narrative of stand-up. Certainly, like, one giant narrative of stand-up is the censorship, and I think that traces along with the self-narrative stand-up. The stand-up of, like, I'm expressing my experience of the world. This is my story.
Right.
And that's... that's just sort of one narrative of it, but there's also the black experience. There's also the Jewish experience.
When Jon Stewart did his young comedian special and he was talking politically, he was the only comedian.
Yeah.
And he was brilliant, but it was, the whole the White House Correspondents' Dinner. No one paid attention to that.
Oh, the Stephen Colbert one?
Yeah, prior to Stephen Colbert. No one paid attention to that. Mm-hmm. It was kind of the combination of all these situations. We had never had a president like Bush, and we had never had someone like Stephen Colbert. And you combine them together, and then that became some important event.
Yeah.
It used to be just like, could you get on Carson? And then could you get on Letterman?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's,
or could you get an HBO special?
Basically, the media landscape has exploded, and podcasts are obviously a part of that.
Yeah.
It's like now everyone has their own, talk show.
Right.
And that's good in the sense that more, whether it's more minority voices or more quirky voices or more, I think that you've talked about Zach Galifianakis' success. I think it would have been harder for him to succeed in a time when there weren't more alternative places for him to develop his talent and to develop it undisturbed.
Right.
The new guy, not new guy, but the what's his name? The kid who did the words and had the Bo Burnham, right?
Yeah.
Like if YouTube hadn't existed, there's no way he would have developed in the way he did.
Right.
He developed that way because he didn't have to go through any of the the New York comedy scene or anything like that.
Yeah, I think there's also there's a strange thing. I mean, I love the stand-up business, but I think that there's a misconception about comedians. I really do. I think there's, we think that, these truths that were relevant for the Borscht Belt comedians, whereas essentially material was just stolen from each other.
Right.
They all were using the same material. We think that, Milton Berle didn't want any of his friends to succeed. And we attach that to this, essentially this kind of, there's a whole class of comedians. I root for other comedians. If anything, I feel awkward that I don't know all the comedians.
I think it would be hard at this point.
So it's like Milton Berle probably didn't have to deal with, comparing the values of those comedians with the values of comedians today. It's like, I want Jeff Ross to succeed. I don't care if Dane Cook succeeds.
No,
I don't.
I agree.
It's like it's good for comedians.
I agree. I think that a lot of people, get confused and upset where art borders commerce. So
right.
where they see somebody else's success as coming at a cost to them, and they see themselves as being artists, and they see somebody else as being a craftsman of a sort.
See, but I think that's bullshit too.
I agree.
I think that's there's a mentality of not doing your homework. Mm-hmm. Like you and Nikki and Sarah doing podcasts and stuff like that. I'm sure there are some comedians that's like they're doing a podcast so that they can help them get their career going and all this. And it's, what is wrong with trying? What is wrong with doing your homework? It's like, in the end, we're all searching for creative fulfillment. We're all pretty bright people. If we just wanted to make a lot of money, we could just go and make a lot of money. it's like being some weird person that goes on stage and makes strangers laugh. It's not the easiest way to make money.
Or the smartest.
Right. And so I just think it's funny because I'll bring this up. I guess it was, I don't know, 10 years ago.
I remember.
Maybe it was maybe 12 years ago.
No.
I had a website. Let me just bring up these two realities. I got my own website, And I remember, I think it was Greg Giraldo was giving me shit. He was like, "You have your own website? What are you, like IBM?" And it was really funny at the time because he thought it was this adventure in narcissism.
Sure.
But I was like, no, I want to have my, I was doing a lot of commercials. I want to have my commercials up there, my acting reel, and, when I'm working at the DC Improv, I want people to know. And, but I remember I was working, this wasn't that long ago, I don't think. The culture is so fluid and, mankind is so arrogant that we forget. I remember a very good friend of mine, a really smart lady that I was working on a TV show with, and she found out that my email address at that time was my name. And she thought that was ridiculous. She was like, "Why would you have your own name as your email address?" And I go, "So people can remember it." And they're like, "Can't they remember something else?" And now it's just, now everyone's name is their email.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think that people are not... it's difficult for people to understand how much technology changes the world that we live in, and at what an incredible rate it changes it. And that's because historically it didn't. I mean, it's until the last 200 years, the last 500 years tops, that suddenly, like, we're in the middle of this explosion of, like, things are moving faster than humans can get used to it.
Right.
And now the cycle is, every 5 years, things are totally different. The idea of an iPhone, the idea of having, everything that you want at your fingertips, knowing where all the restaurants are, knowing where you are in the city, not needing to know anyone's phone number. Like, we're finding ways to offload our brain into this thing, and then we can know more things. Right.
And the irony is that we're not that smarter.
No. We're not. I mean, the core intelligence. I mean, I do think that people are getting smarter in the sense that we have more stimulus. Like, so, for instance, there are a bunch of studies that show that, like, video games increase your ability to focus on specific tasks, and accomplish them. Obviously, they increase your ability to focus on school.
Who paid for that research?
I know. Right? Yeah, no, it's a fair question.
But again, it's. I'm cutting you off. I mean, I understand the point, but it's like, obviously, it's, it's interesting even to consider the presence of video games, and I'm not criticizing them at all, but it is like, it's. I don't have to tell you how huge it is.
Yeah, it's driving the movies in 3D are all being driven by the video game market.
It's an entire, huge, gigantic cultural element.
Yeah.
That, is an industry that's going to rival, if it hasn't already, the film industry.
It does rival the film industry, and it's one of those things where I'm like, hopefully, I think it will develop as an art form more, and it has in certain ways, like as an aesthetic art form. But it's starting to develop as a narrative art form.
I know where it's going. I saw Caprica. But I think it's interesting how it's...
You were the one.
It's changing. Yeah, I was the one. But Patton was amazing on there.
Oh, yeah.
And, but, it's amazing to consider, because, I'm doing this download thing, and people are like, yeah, stick it to Comedy Central. And it's like, pardon me, Comedy Central's been really good to me. It's like, I remember when YouTube started, this guy wanted to do a law case, a class action law case against YouTube. And I'm like, YouTube's helping me.
Yeah.
I don't want to go after YouTube. It's like XM and, whatever, Sirius, if they're still in business by the time this airing. They've helped me a lot.
Yeah, it's really clear that various, as technology progresses, people just find different ways to get the access to the material they want. And that's why it's really hilarious, but also depressing to watch, things like the Motion Picture Association, try to keep up with that and try to legislate around it. Because it's just like, look, if you gave me the ability to watch the show that came out in Britain at the same time that all the Brits are watching it, then I wouldn't steal it. Like, I would pay a couple dollars for it.
Yeah, yeah.
But you want to charge me, like, massive amounts 2 years later. I can get it.
Well, that's some of the Louis had his own story, but my story was I might as well just bring it up, but it's like my story. There was you may have heard. There was the censorship that I was dealing with because I was talking about McDonald's.
Right. That's,
and so
you did on Night of Too Many Stars.
Yeah, and so Comedy Central. It's not important that it was Comedy Central. It's important that it was a network that was like, look, this is a key advertiser. You can't be calling their spokesman a pedophile. So,
which is the end of the bit and a really funny line.
And so it's not the end anymore. Now it's much longer. But and so I was faced with the predicament of, all right, I'm gonna have to find the irony of being this clean comedian, the family-friendly comedian, yet I'm confronting censorship when Sarah's singing, from her crotch, and that's okay. And, Steve Carell's simulating an orgasm, and that's okay. But I'm talking about an advertiser, so that's an issue. So it made me think outside the box. And
outside the bun, I believe.
Outside the bun. And so I wanted to do something, I thought, here we go. All right. One of the ideas I had was like, all right, these corporations, they want to put advertising on television, on specials, so that people will drive people there. I go, all right, one of my ideas is I'll sell it directly to Amazon or eBay. So I'll send them that. So instead of I'm essentially, the special will air in their store.
Yeah, like Netflix kind of thing, or that. Yeah,
right. I mean, I think Netflix is a little different, but if you look at
definitely.
Amazon as this huge store, this internet store, and eBay this huge store, if they had my special, people knew about my special, they had to watch it on eBay or Amazon. That would make sense. But of course, these people are not in the content business,
exactly.
And also Amazon they're doing their Netflix version. So I thought about Netflix, I thought about Hulu, and, I was always in talks with Comedy Central and, some of the pay cable things. It's like the
Sounds
deals.
Exhausting.
I mean, it was fun. The deals
nice to be
are
the prettiest girl at the ball?
Well, it was not. Well, that's the problem. The problem is I haven't been on television for 3 years. And so, but the point I'm getting to is that the model that exists right now, which we know about, is, the tradition of the DVD, CD releasing goes back to the music industry where they would just rip off artists. So you'd have to get as powerful as Madonna or U2 to actually make money with your product. And so that model exists. And so then what I was encountering was what they were offering me, these corporations or these networks or these outlets, was what I foresaw as the exact same amount of money that I would make
just doing it on your own.
Just doing it on my own.
Yeah.
And it would result in people that liking my comedy would be able to get it for a much lower price.
Yeah.
So then Louis happens, right? And I see his,
You're like,
and
oh, stole my thunder.
well, it's I was a little hesitant about the website. I was like, my manager kind of, it was pre-Louis, and he was like, selling it on your website, that's a little JV. That's what you do when you can't get a distributor.
Yeah.
But Louis, I think, changed the whole perception of that.
It's something that had already happened to some extent in the music industry with like 9 Inch Nails and stuff like that.
And Radiohead.
And Radiohead, exactly.
Right.
So that I think, Louis doing that as being such a visual person does legitimize it for other people.
And he's on the, he's, the critically acclaimed television guy of this decade.
Yeah.
Right? And so he did it, and then...
He's our emissary to the outside world.
Right. And so then the task became, how do I do this different from Louis?
Right, yeah.
Can I, I certainly can't charge more, not that I would necessarily want to, but how can I do this different? And eventually what I learned from Louis is that keep it really easy to buy. You keep it easier to buy than to steal.
Yeah.
And then you also you keep it at a really low price. So it's like
and the friction was very low. It was a quick buy.
Yeah.
And also he had it was opt in versus opt out. So for the mailing list, the automatic setting was no, I don't want to receive emails from this stupid fat guy, or whatever he said, which was self-deprecating. And and then you had to check yes, send me stuff, which is the exact opposite of every even charity. Like I was just tweeting about that of can I sign a petition that lets me not get signed up to your mailing list and whenever I sign a petition, because I just hate that.
Yeah, and it's not just that you hate getting emails. It interferes with you reading important emails.
Yeah.
And so then I was faced with the how do I do this different from Louis? He obviously had done a charity element where he gave away some of from his first million.
Yeah, and you're getting to it's the Woodruff Foundation.
The Woodruff Foundation.
What do they do?
They help out veterans and their families. Cool. So they're essentially
it's a good time.
Yeah. Well, it's, these people have served our country, and, I'm not going to present myself as some expert on this issue. It's just something. I had done another benefit, and Bob and Lee Woodruff were there, and I saw just the absence of bureaucracy. It was, it's called the Bob Woodruff Foundation because he runs it. And he finds out situations where veterans or their families need money, and they get them money.
No, that's good.
But I ended up picking that, and I was like, because I thought for a while, I'll make mine less expensive than Louis. I'll make mine $4. And then I was like, well, maybe if I can add some element to make this some goodwill, like maybe we're doing the whole thing. Maybe the thing that I can add into this is that we're going to raise money to help a charity. So I don't know. I mean, but that was my valiant attempt to do something a little different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know that I think it's as important to do something a little different in the way that you do about this, because I feel like the way that you're coming at it, it's like he's doing this big thing, but this is where things are headed. Like he's an early adopter. Right. You are also on that path.
Right.
I think it's like this is probably what was going on the first time somebody released a CD, and then somebody was like, "Oh, I got to put liner notes in mine now. I got to do it like this," and then eventually you're just it's a CD. They're all gonna look roughly the same.
Right. Well, I agree with you. I totally agree with you in that. But there's also the spirit of a comedian that you want to be original.
Yes, but I think that originality. This is also something that I think is sort of interesting and talks in the art, is there's a difference between originality in the sense of that has never been done before, and originality in the sense of it's never been done in this way, through this person's voice before. Right. You're not the first comedian to talk about overindulgence. Right. Exactly. I'm not the first comedian to talk about sciencey things. Right. It's just that, you have a very unique collection of skills.
But it's point of view.
Yeah, it's point of view, and it's the specific combination that separates us. I think that your site, by in being in virtue of the fact that it's yours and hopefully has some of your flavor in that, is going to be different than what Louis is. Right. And I just think that what we're talking about is we're in an age where people are essentially it's like subscribing on to other people's channels in the same way that tweeting works. But it's this, the notion of 1,000 true fans. It's like if you have 1,000 true fans who are willing to spend $100 on you a year, then that's all you ever need. Right. And it's like we're in the age where if you have your channel, your thing that you are producing, and you can get enough people looking at that channel, and then you just consistently produce it, they'll spend a little bit of money. Right. And as long as you eliminate all the bureaucracy that was in place from the old days, it's got a low overhead.
Well, I think that's also what was really interesting about, and that's some of why, because they kept these different kind of platforms or traditional methods kept coming to me with different offers. That's why I announced early, because I didn't want to.
You didn't want them to think you were leading them on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some of what I was encountering was they did not see, they were going from, they were looking at like CD sales and DVD sales, and I'm like, no, that's all over. And by the way, my DVD sales
from the future.
from King Baby and Beyond the Pale are great.
Yeah.
But they're looking at, CD sales are kind of, CD sales are a disaster now.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, CD sales aren't that great, so we'll offer you this. And I'm like, that's absurd. I know that, if Louis can sell 200,000, I'm pretty confident I could sell 50,000 and break even.
Yeah.
So what is, and in your model, because I would have to pay for my special, I'd probably break even. So what is the alternative here? I felt like I had no alternative.
No, it's legitimacy. That's what they think they're offering.
Yeah.
And I think it's really funny, especially to try to offer a comedian legitimacy, just because I feel like the minute you choose to be a comedian, you sort of give up on the idea of like respectability.
Right. Well, it's I think there's an outsider element. That's why I think it's so funny when people kind of consider trends in comedy. Stand-up comedy is a very individual pursuit.
Certainly.
And so when people are like, when people even get caught up in labels of a club comic or an alternative comic or, all these things, it's like I sit there and I think, go ahead, waste your time. And because in the end, you're either funny or you're not.
I agree, although I do see there being broad, like, aesthetic schools or, like, things that we could sort of, describe. I mean, I think that what Stephen Wright does is, there's a thread of that in what Dimitri Martin does, in what Mitch Hedberg did, in what Zach Galifianakis does, and what Nick Thune does. Not that they're all the same, but it's a whole different movement in the same way that all the comedians who tell jokes about, this was my family growing up and this was the hard time I had, are telling their thing. But these are very broad sorts of schools of performance or schools of, like, style.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a parallel, there's an obvious parallel to music, right?
Yes.
And there's something about, Taylor Swift is supposedly a country music singer, right? Mm-hmm. But in the end, it doesn't matter. She writes songs that people like, And so it's, I don't know. I mean, it's almost one of those, this is one of the conversations I would have with you where I'm drinking a beer and we're just kind of like, I can be stupid. But
no, it's good.
I think that there's something about...
You're talking about the difference, I feel like, between when people segment these things in order to pass judgments on them versus just sort of describing them.
Yeah, I think that, there's...
Because,
believe me, I'm a comedy nerd. I love talking about this stuff, but I do think that the present-day version of alternative comedy or underground comedy or whatever we're calling it, and club comedy... It's going to be completely different in 5 years.
Yeah, and it's already a meaningless distinction.
Yeah.
The only thing that I'll say, and I had a conversation with Ryan Connor, another comedian in New York, about the difference between the two. And what he said, which I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, but what he said was he thought that the clubs taught you how to perform. And if you go into a club, you're going to learn to perform for an audience. Yeah. The alternative rooms you can go through for years and not really learn to perform, but you will be, like, funny. You have to be funny, you have to be sort of original and authentic in the alternative rooms, and you don't necessarily have to be as authentic in the clubs. And I think you're coming at a different. I'm sure you're coming to both at a very different level.
I think what he says is incredibly valid, but I think that there's also. I think that when we generalize clubs and we generalize alternative rooms, it's just as, kind of absurd. And I do it. I'm sure I'm guilty. It's just as absurd as generalizing all comedians. All comedians are drug addicts. All comedians are neurotic. All comedians are single. All comedians are suicidal. It's just as kind of absurd. But, I love the conversation, but there's something about it that is, and I know I'm contradicting myself a little bit here, but I don't know. I just feel like, all these clubs, whether it's UCB or Gotham, it's like, there's factors that go into the success and
Yeah.
the value of the audience. Whether it be UCB, it's there's students in there that get in free. They're taking improv classes, so they're young and they're happy to be there and they're in a creative spirit. Or an alternative room where it ends up being graphic designers that are so counter against a comedy club because they've seen, in their development years on The Simpsons, the criticism of comedy clubs. Mm-hmm. Or you go to, like, Acme in Minneapolis, which is a great comedy club.
Yeah.
It's just like a great comedy
just
club.
Down at Laughing Skull, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and so I think that these things are so fluid. It's like cities that are great at comedy, great audiences. It's like there's no assumption that that's gonna last.
Well, I think it's a constant. It's like a pendulum swinging. The clubs were charging too much and focusing not on the art and just on the thing because they were the only game in town and that was at a certain time and that's how that was. And as a result, this whole other scene started coming up, and also because of the internet and also because of the various kinds of ways to get information out.
Right.
Now clubs are moving back in that direction because clubs lose business to these guys. So now you're going to see clubs that are more more networking, more online, more doing digital stuff. Laughing Devil just opened up in Long Island City, and they're being very aggressive about sort of doing things online and about having hangouts that are not to have it be more community oriented than just the classic, idea of a club.
Yeah, I think as a comedian, I think any comedian would say this. We're always trying to find the best audience, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to find the best audience that's going to provide us with an environment where we can improvise some amazing shit, right? Where we can get that brilliant tag. And so, for me, it's I love the variety of it, too.
Yeah, I think it's important to perform in front of a lot of different audiences. Yeah. Otherwise, you always... It's just the same thing as, if you just tell a joke once, you don't know if that joke works.
Right. And there's some rooms, I did Seth's room last night, and, that's a blast. Seth Herzog's suite.
Yeah.
But that's, I was making fun of him. I'm like, it's like, it's such a unique room. It's kind of like a great party that you can go to, but how you're funny there might not work anywhere else.
Of course not.
But it's kind of a fun workout. Yeah,
and I think it's really important for comics to not let themselves only perform in front of one group of people, because otherwise, that's why I moved to New York, to be honest.
Yeah.
I moved to New York because I wanted to be, and people were like, oh, you're not ready, and I was like, I agree, I'm not ready. Yeah. I'm not, because there's this whole notion of, only move to New York once you're ready for industry. Yeah. I was like, no, I want to be exposed to all these different influences. I want to see a lot of different things in my gestative, period.
Yeah.
And that's been a really good experience for me, although, perhaps a slower ascent than if I just stayed in a small pond. Just because there's so much here. Yeah, I don't know if... it's so funny because when I would do... particularly when I was working in clubs, I would work with, some middle or some opener, and they'd be like, I'm moving to New York, can you help me out? And I'm like, I'll help you out. By the way, I don't even think this rule is true at this point, but I'll help you out. But some of it there used to be just... you had to hang out. You had to just hang out. And I'm sure that exists. It doesn't exist as much anymore, but I remember Pete Holmes. He opened for me a couple times, and he was like, I'm moving to New York. And I was like, all right, I'll get you in here, and I'll get you in there. But it doesn't mean it's over. Even though he was middling for me, I'm like, there's gonna be some kind of, strange fatigue where you're like, I can't do anything. I remember Patrice O'Neill complaining about this to me. I started in New York, so it took them a long time to forget about me being really a shitty comic. Yeah. So, but I remember telling Pete Holmes, I'm like, go to the alternative rooms. Go there. Because I do believe in comedy clubs you can develop a lot of bad habits. Mm-hmm. And you can just end up just being
irreverent for the sake of being irreverent. That's not to say that someone like Bill Burr is like that.
No, there's a lot.
But it's just to say that there's some things that work in different rooms, But I do think that what I love about New York is the energy and the
pace,
the pacing and
the passion about
fluid. I mean, it's like UCB East, now it's just like packed every night.
I know, right?
It didn't exist. I mean, I remember when it was a video store.
Yeah.
So, it's something where like the rules of yesterday are not applicable today.
It's funny because at the root of this, a lot of what you're saying is like things are changing so fast, which I agree.
Yeah, no, they're changing very fast. But there's something about it that it doesn't worry me because I think that it all comes down to funny. So if you're funny, there's some things that are fleeting funny. I mean, we've had some of these conversations. There's some things that like can have a big splash. You can tell a great joke, but if you can't follow that with other good jokes, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So if you can't follow yourself, you're fucked, right?
Yeah. Well, so there's a distinction. See, I wasn't sure whether you were talking about jokes or writing which only has a short shelf life because it's too trapped in the times, versus what you were talking about, which was you needing to have a depth of material or a breadth of material, or because if you just have a funny joke, if you just have one or two things, then you don't have enough to supply fill the demand.
Right. Well, I think that there's a couple things. There's one. There is topical material is.
It's radioactive because it just degrades after.
It degrades, and it's I did that. I mean, I used to have topical stuff, and it serves no purpose. I mean,
it's like junk food, in a sense.
Yeah.
Like it's like, ooh, this tastes good right now because it's exciting, but it has no calories. Actually,
Yeah.
that's actually like your McDonald's bit.
But I also think that there's. I remember someone I really respected a long time ago. I gave him a tape of VHS tape of my stand-up.
I've heard of him.
And he was a director, and he watched it and he goes, it seems mean. It seems mean. This is a long time ago, right?
Do you think you were meaner back then?
I think I was meaner. And there is something about mean and bitchy stuff that is funny. Like everyone, the funniest person is your funny gay friend that is just like a fucking bitch, right? Who's just like, just tearing new ones into everyone, and you laugh. But there's also a fatigue built into that.
Yeah, actually, this is when I was in college. I listened to David Cross's albums nonstop, and it was very interesting because I really like him. I think he's hilarious, obviously. But I would always feel kind of drained after listening to his stuff because I was just like, oh, it's acerbic, it's like, it's biting.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't, I'm not even talking about him. I'm talking about just like, it's almost kind of like Bill Gates, used to talk about like, are you doing good or are you doing evil?
Well,
and so I think that like sometimes like if you're making fun of Britney Spears or the Kardashians, I'm guilty of it.
Yeah.
But if that's all you're doing, that's not good. That's evil.
Yeah, it's not really moving anything forward.
No, there's a social value in pointing out our ridiculous obsession with. But I think tabloids, intellectually, we all know that tabloids are shit. So why would you propel the tabloid conversation further?
I think it's lazy usually. I mean, or it's some confusion about. I'll put it this way: it's easier to talk about things that everybody is already talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and again, there's part of me that's like, I'm just talking about myself. It's like, I'm not saying that backpedal. No, but I'm just saying that for me, I don't like doing a joke where, I love the shock. I love the surprise. I love, in my thing I talk about kind of drinking tuna water and the audience always kind of cringes. But that's different from like a joke that makes people feel bad.
Do you know Stuart Lee?
I don't know if I do.
Oh, he's a really funny British comedian. Really amazing. He's had like the highest reviewed show in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And he's also an art critic. And one of the things he said, which he analogized essentially different kinds of comedy art to songs of different kinds of songs. And he was saying, everybody needs songs that we can all sing, and when we need, just like we need jokes that are about, just nothing, or about nothing like that, or jokes that we can all, that just make us go like, yes, that is how I feel when I go to this place, or that thing.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with all-encompassing utilitarian art. It serves a purpose. The problem is that it's just kind of shit.
Right. No, that's interesting. It's there's something about this was a conversation I had with Todd Glass maybe about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And, there's different types of comics. I don't know if this exists anymore because now everyone's caught up in labeling.
I've been thinking about this, but,
because
go ahead.
Did we talk about this before?
We've talked about it, yeah, and I've heard you talk about this before.
Because now we're caught up in, is he an alternative, or is he mainstream, or is he da-da-da, and it's like, does he support Bush? And it's like, but Todd's,
nobody supports Bush anymore.
Nobody supported him anyway. But so there was the whole thing of like, there was the clown, okay? There was the observational guy. So the clown would be, God, I'm trying to think of, like, Mark Cohen was one. Mm-hmm. Who's a clown? Just really high energy. Bobby Tisdale's a clown.
Sure.
Maybe Brody Stevens, and again, this is not an insult, Brody, if you're listening.
T.J. Miller, too.
T.J. Miller.
Yeah.
Also Matt McCarthy, right? Yeah. And then there's observational guys like me, Mike Kaplan, because I'm Seinfeld, and I'm going to get to another. Then there's joke smiths, all right? Like, let's see. A joke smith is similar to an observational guy. Then there's the preacher, all right? Now, the preacher is like Marin, Keith Robinson,
Kinnison,
Bill Hicks, David Cross.
Sure.
And, I haven't talked about this probably since the last time I saw you at Cabin or something like that, but there's other ones. But, like, the theory that Todd Glass and I had is that was how it was before. Mm-hmm. And what happened is now because a lot of 80s comics were observational, just solely observational. And they didn't have their point of view tied to it. Like David Brenner was very much, what's up with egg salads,
Yeah.
And so the theory that Todd and I had was that you need to have elements of two. Mm-hmm. You need to be either a preacher and an observational guy, which is kind of what Louis is.
Sure.
And and also there's the weirdo, right? Just kind of like the weird character like Dimitri and Hedberg and Emo and Jonathan Winters. And so you have to. Sometimes comedians have three of them. Sometimes comedians, and I'm talking present day comedians. But so in other words, it's and there's also the real angry comedian, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that part of what you're getting at is that there are things outside of just the comedy that we are essentially bringing as a value to the table.
Right.
There are things that and there are a variety of things, and this is why it's so hard to compare comedians in this in these competitions, is because you're like, this guy's trying to convince everyone that this way of living is stupid, and this guy's just saying that potatoes are silly.
Exactly.
And they're both really good.
It's absurd. It's absurd, and it's unfair to compare David Cross to Maria Bamford.
I know.
It's just absurd. It's like so. It was the character. The character is is Maria's character, right? And then I'm a little bit of a character. You know, Mitch Vatel's a little bit of a character. You know, David Tell, ironically, is a bit of a character. And
characters are tricky, I always feel like, because, you know, it's like...
Jim Norton's a bit of a character. Sometimes it's their, you know, social satirist is also... replace angry with social satirist. So there's a lot of things that, you know... So, you know, Janine is a social satirist. And Geraldo used to get so mad when I would call him a social satirist because he didn't want a label. And because no one wants a label, right?
Right.
It's like, you know, no one wants to be described by, like, one adjective.
I think some people fear that if they are labeled in a certain way, then that is somehow limiting of what they do.
Well, it's also, you know, we're in the perception industry, right? I mean, the entertainment industry. It's like, I'm a character actor. I mean, if
ophthalmologists.
If I get
optometrists.
If I get an audition, you know, 5 out of 10 times the character description will be like an ugly guy in his 40s, you know? But that's that's the life of an actor, you know? And that's also the same thing that, you know, Danny DeVito see. You know, it's like, you know, so
you do not strike me as the Danny DeVito type.
I'm very similar to Danny DeVito. But so I don't know.
Yeah, I think that these are just different values, and I think this is something I've sort of talked about is that different kind of comedians appeal. I see it in sort of evolutionary terms.
Yes,
which is this notion that different parts of our brains evolved at different times.
Yes,
we have this.
There's a belief that the brain, the decision making ability, doesn't complete itself till you're 26.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's the frontal lobe that develops.
I'm smarter
slower.
than you.
That's fair.
Yeah, all right.
I'm 27, so I am just able to think.
All right, yes.
I'm trying it on. So we started, like, humans weren't speaking, obviously. Languages didn't develop for, you know, the first many thousands of years that humans were around. Did they not laugh? No, they laughed. Animals laugh. We see that in nature. Like, what they're laughing at is nonverbal stuff. Smiling isn't just something that I experience internally. It's a communicative act where because you have mirror neurons in your head that essentially mimic what I'm doing. When I smile, part of your brain is like, oh, we're in a state of play. I am going to smile too. Now we're sharing a transmission of that. And, you know, so there are the things that, you know, Louis talks about, and the things that make people laugh in Louis' stuff is this very deep, guttural thing. It appeals to a very root part of the human brain in a lot of cases, which is like shitting, eating, crying, and dying. You know, like it's like these embarrassments and shames that are like really deeply rooted in that. But you look at Mike Kaplan, and not that he doesn't have any fart jokes, but like he's talking about wordplay and you know, logical connections between different things. Yeah. And that's very funny, but it's appealing to a totally different part of your brain, a part of the brain which developed centuries, thousands of years after the other parts of the brain. Right. And so it's you know, I think that you just see some like, I know people who would be like, oh, I only like, you know, Louis, or like I only like, you know, this Mike's style, and it's always like, I'm always like, yeah, you just have, you prefer to have your laugh in your gut and not in your head, and that's fine. It's kind of,
you know, I saw this interview with Lionel Richie, and people used to make fun of his sappy songs until they fell in love. You know what I mean? It's like, we all sit there and say you know, it's like, it's kind of silly, but once you fall in love, it's like the cliches about children, which, you know, when you don't have children, it's like people talking about, baby changed my life, is profoundly annoying. But then when you have a kid, you're like, yeah, this baby's changed my life. And so there is something about that. But I think there's also something larger that I think is really interesting, which is, I call it, you know, the you know, I identified it and I called it the zeitgeist. No, I'm calling it. It's also this cultural wave. Mm-hmm. There's a cultural wave that creates these huge peaks, and for me, it's I don't want to be on the cover of Rolling Stone. I don't want to be, you know, I'm not dying to, have drinks with Jay-Z. I love Jay-Z. I think he's a genius. It would be nice, but it's not my makeup. You know what I mean? And so, and there's some people that there's some elements in our culture that make things huge.
Right, pop culture. It's cultural touchstones.
And so, the interesting point is that sometimes, the intelligentsia or intelligent people, because we all think we're intelligent, just as we all think that we're going to be millionaires, right? Is that we think
only if my mom dies.
we think we're free of that, right? We're free of this cultural influence.
Right.
But the
we're
reality
just on a different side of it.
But the reality is that Married with Children was the #1 show.
Yep.
And now it's not in syndication, or maybe it is. That Paul Reiser show was the #1 show, and supposedly a year later he couldn't sell tickets doing stand-up. Kevin James's show ended, and he became a movie star. So it's like there's things about that happen that I find very, very interesting. And we're not going to figure it out or solve it, but it's like there was a time where, and this is not a criticism, where they were trying to convince us that Cindy Crawford was an actress. You're probably too young to remember this, but there was this groundswell of where culturally, it's not like there was some group of people going, we're going to make her a star.
There might have been.
But she was the most beautiful woman on the planet. She was a very sweet, intelligent woman, brilliant. Let's make her a star. And it didn't work. And so I'm trying to understand, and I think it's fascinating when I'll go to Huffington Post and I'll go, really? So this is what is important to our culture.
To one aspect of it, but
right.
Yeah,
but
large.
That's a pretty big platform.
No, I agree. But I mean, I think, look, there's a study of chimpanzees which basically shows you this. Chimpanzees, juice for them is money. Like if that's what they use to simulate barter and exchange situations for them. Chimpanzees will give up their juice in order to look at pictures of higher status chimpanzees.
Wow.
It's as simple as that.
Right.
When they gave them when they just gave them money and didn't do anything, what immediately happened was prostitution.
Wow.
It's like we have a very basic, we have these basic impulses, and humanity, we are very complex on top of that.
Yeah.
But when we talk about this like nature-nurture distinction, it's a false dichotomy.
Yeah.
Society is a magnification. It's an amplification tool that takes what we are normally and then turns it into something like a crazy version of itself.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting how, having done that Broadway play, just seeing how stand-up is let's not kid ourselves. It's down there with mimes and people that ride pogo sticks and parades.
In the basement.
It's not in some tastemaker set. There are exceptions. Louis, they love him at NPR. But there is something about to kind of participate in Broadway. It was an amazing experience. I loved it. But it was really interesting also to see this Pulitzer Prize winning play that is very interesting. It was a good play, and I've seen a lot of plays, and to see,
I can tell from your glasses.
No, to see, this tastemaker set embrace and reject certain things, and it's
powerful.
It's fascinating,
and it's more. Look, that's going to happen in comedy too. It's just that comedy is a younger art.
Well, comedy also has a meritocracy element.
Yes, that's
so. In
true.
other words, it's like
but
people criticize Dane Cook. Dane Cook was fucking killing.
Yeah, but you know what? There are terrible plays on Broadway that musicals. There are musicals. People can hate the shit out of them, but it's Disney World.
Right.
there is an audience
Right.
for that.
Yeah, I mean, I took my daughter to Beauty and the Beast twice, and there is something. I mean, Neil Simon could do no wrong for 30 years. It's like it's not to say that he's not a brilliant writer, but it's like, the track record was set, and they're just like, whatever you want, man.
Again, it's what we were talking about creating your identity and creating your brand. It's just that I think that it used to be far more determined by larger groups of empowered individuals.
Right.
And
the
now
democracy, the democracy is being taken out of entertainment. That's what you're saying.
Well.
You're saying you hate Jews.
Yes, you got it. No, I hate myself, and I'm a Jew. What I'm saying is that it used to be more of a representative democracy or an oligarchy in certain senses, because there were groups of power which held the megaphones. Megaphones were expensive, and only a few people had megaphones. Now, everybody's got a megaphone.
It's sad too, because I love I love news. I consume a lot of news, and a lot of it
I love
is
news because I hate humanity.
No, but to see this evolution of. I talked about this with Jackie Cation,
Yeah, she's
and
great.
she was like,
She's friends with Stuart Lee also.
She was like, you watch cable news? You watch Fox? And I'm like, of course I watch Fox. I watch Fox. I watch MSNBC. I watch Al Jazeera. I watch MSNBC. And I read Huffington Post, and I read the Daily Beast, and I read Drudge. And because to me it is amazing to see the misinterpretation. But here's my point. My point is there's so many outlets. When it used to be CBS, NBC, and CBS, NBC, and ABC, the volume wasn't so loud. Now you watch them, and it's just yelling.
Yeah, you're talking about the signal to noise ratio.
They end up these infighting.
But that's because you can never have another Beatles in an age when the market is so fractured. You don't have one, or what's his name when Kennedy was shot, and he's holding his head like this.
Yeah.
Right, like that is not like you don't have a father figure in the news like that.
No.
In an age when there's just a million different channels.
Yeah, it's just interesting, and Jeannie and I tried to figure out a joke about how the difference between news and gossip is nothing. There's nothing. It's like we see it. It's so unfortunate, this Trayvon Martin thing. It's like it's turned into like this. It's like this poor kid. And but that's kind of our mentality, right? It's just to consume it. It comes out this elbow, and but I don't know. I think there's also something about where I think we know too much about people.
Yes.
There's an absence of privacy.
Well, that's why I find people when I tell them I'm doing stand up, they're like, "Oh, you want to be a star? You want to be a celebrity?" I'm like, "No. Well, most comedians are not
right.
Even the most even people who would be recognized by everyone within the industry, don't have mainstream recognition in certain cases. And B, I'm like, I'm already overexposed.
Exactly.
I'm this close to having, a paparazzi outside of my window now just because we got cameras everywhere.
Right.
It's I don't need to ask for that attention.
Yeah, and I think there's this absence of people saying, and I talk about this in the McDonald's joke, right? Where it's, Jennifer Aniston. And people are like, well, she asked for it. And I'm like, it doesn't matter if she asked for it. We still shouldn't be consuming it. It's like you see, you're in the grocery store and you'll see this thing, Jennifer Aniston, is she pregnant or does she want to have a baby? And you're like, that's none of our fucking business. And I'm not saying that, I'm not guilty of it, but I'm saying that I don't understand why when I get on a plane and people sit down with 5 magazines, that they're not a little embarrassed. I mean, I'm embarrassed that I'm reading the USA Today. You should be embarrassed that you're reading OK. And by the way, OK, if you'd want me to promote my special line, OK Magazine. And again, that's not to say that there's not some value there, and I'm open to someone saying, Jim, you're wrong. But it's just...
I think that I think you're right. I try to put in good things. I sort of have a mentality of trash in, trash out. Like, I don't want to consume, too much junky stuff because
Right.
otherwise I'm afraid that's what I will begin to produce and think in the sense of.
Right.
But, I mean, look, if you take in a lot of things like that because you want to see what people are talking about so that you can critique that,
Yeah.
because there are comedians who,
I think that's a
criticize
different thing.
culture of
I'm
comedy.
talking about the
But
larger,
exactly.
the
Yeah.
larger thing.
Again, it's just there is a biological interest in
higher status.
status people.
Oh my God.
And it's just rooted in status, authority. Most people are followers in a sense.
Right, right.
We have a desire to follow.
And no one wants to identify themselves as a follower.
Exactly.
And, it's just, I don't mind it. I just think that there isn't kind of that chuckle of like, you know what, I bought a Britney Spears song. Can you believe it? There's none of that. I don't expect a 13-year-old to say, to apologize for buying Britney Spears.
So you're saying there's not enough guilty shame involved.
What's
or like
wrong with a
guilty
little
pleasure?
guilt?
No,
And I also think that there's something about then what happens is, someone like Nickelback becomes really successful, and then they become some, like this band. They focus so much energy on attacking Nickelback.
Right. That becomes actually. I think Nickelback is like a hacky punchline now because that's so much.
That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Right? It's just
they're the backlash to the backlash.
It's just to me, it just seems kind of like leave them alone. It's not like they're raping kids. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's something about me where I kind of am guilty. That's some of why, my stand-up is because I think there's an inherent hypocrisy in social satire.
Yes.
There's it's why people have it's why people look at like that person's a Christian. Really, I heard them swear, or that person's a Christian. I saw I know someone who had sex with him. And it's like. The hypocrisy is
I think
the
that
deal breaker.
Well, I think that at the root, though, part of what you're talking about is very much a let he without sin cast the first stone thing.
Yeah.
And I also think that it's telling like your comedy is. It targets different groups, but the groups that it targets are in many cases diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
So what I mean is, in your McDonald's bit, you sort of make fun of the middle America, the idea of middle America and that sort of McDonald's thing, but then you immediately turn it back on the people who are laughing at that and go to like, and you people who are like, I don't eat McDonald's. Well, you do. It's just a different thing, but you're guilty of the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, I think that there's that kind of balance is... it's something that certainly appeals to me. Like I'm in my comedy, I'm doing a lot on just the notion of balance right now.
Right.
For that same kind of reason, because whenever I get too far in one direction, I always turn around and go like, oh no, I've become an asshole. Like let me walk back to the middle.
I think humility is really important. And by the way,
agree.
I think vulnerability is incredibly important in stand-up comedy, and I don't think people value it anymore. It's like, I think that's the most appealing attribute that Mark Maron has.
The funny thing, this is what's so interesting, is that...
And by the way, Mark, if you're listening, it's a compliment.
No, I think that's clear. And what's interesting is that the people who are thought of as being vulnerable are always the narrative storytellers, Richard Pryor, Maron, people who are like bearing their soul. But I'm like looking at like people who write jokes, and yes, joke writing, knowing that a joke is going to work every time because you've done it enough times, it can be a kind of armor in a sense.
Yeah.
But it's also like these are honest expressions of my view of the world, and me trying to like navigate my way to this center ground where I'm like not being an asshole about this way, and it's like important to me that I not be an asshole.
Right. I think that's important. By the way, I mean, it brings me back to a point. It's like the narrative storyteller, is so much of stand-up. Performance is a really important element of stand-up. Mm-hmm. And so when people go, oh, it's unbelievable. You can perform a joke in a way where you act like you're thinking of the tag.
Yeah.
And you watch any great comedian, and you will see that moment where they'll be like, and this.
Yeah, it's the pause, it's the time.
It's it's a surprise attack, right? You do the punchline, people think it's over, and then you just stumble something out. And the whole thing is that that's why when people go, he's just telling jokes, it's like Ricky Gervais is just telling jokes.
We're all just telling jokes. Settle down.
It's like it's some of it is just there's something Jeannie's like, it's jealousy, and I'm like, but some of it is.
I think a lot of this stuff comes from fear, and it becomes from the same reason that people fear musical comedians, because they're like, oh, but I don't have that. If they're doing that, do I need to get a guitar? Do I need to learn how to do that? It's like, oh, if they're doing jokes and people want jokes, well, that's not what I do. Right. Am I screwed? And then rather than being afraid for them, or confident in themselves, or dealing with that fear of themselves, it's easier to externalize your negative emotions into judgments or hatred of other people.
Well, there's also I think there's I'm lucky because I've been kicking around forever. Like, if I had been doing stand-up for 2 years and I was doing theaters, I could understand it. But some of it is, I've been around forever.
Sure.
And I work, really hard, I think. But there's also something of a fear of, and I'm not going to say any names, sometimes people get success and then their ego explodes. So there's a little bit of like, oh, geez, what's coming? You know what I mean?
Right.
With some success. I mean, the stories, the development days are over, but, the stories of comedians getting development deals, $200,000, $400,000.
Sure.
And buying a BMW and moving to LA and nothing happened.
And drowning in their vomit.
And, them kind of being dismissive to their friends and them coming back to New York. There's countless stories of that.
Yeah, which is so funny because it's so uncharacteristic of the kind of humility that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's all to do, like, I do think that humility is something that is very lacking in a lot of comics, and in a lot of people. I don't think that's, just comics. I just think that comics are, Well,
humility is weakness within the corridor of hate. And
is that a quote? Or what is that?
No, and I say this affectionately, but like the Acela line, which is Boston to DC, is, it's where this country was founded.
Yeah.
Right? And there is a toughness,
an aggressive comedy.
There's an aggressiveness in Philadelphia and in Boston, and you see it.
And there are great comics.
Great comics. And there is a combative nature.
Yep.
To that, and there are obviously exceptions. Paul F. Tompkins is not this, and so there is, Todd Glass is not this.
Sure.
Stephen Wright is not this, but a rich tradition of comedy as war.
But I think,
and I encountered that starting in New York.
Yeah.
Where you had to prove that you were tough before the conversation could even continue.
I've seen that too, but
I think that's what started some of the alternative rooms.
I see that as I see that as part a blue collar, white collar thing. I think it's in part an extension of, like, these are a bunch of people who came up with very tough, that's what a lot of the middle class, does. And the men are not in touch with their emotions. A lot of their fathers fought in wars. It's considered
and we're
weak.
living here in Allentown.
Exactly.
But there is some of that. But I think that there is something of, look, I'm from a small town in Indiana. My dad was a small town banker. I am not blue collar. I'm not going to present myself as that. But there is also something. It's a heritage.
Yes.
It's
well, there's pride.
There's provincial ethnocentric kind of culture. I think one of the things that I wish I was from Boston. Boston loves their sons and daughters.
Sure.
And Philly is people love Philly. It's like you watch Chris Matthews and it's like he talks about Pennsylvania like it's a love story.
I don't.
And-
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think I would ever. I can't get behind those kinds of like notions of city pride or group pride in that way. In the same way that I can't get behind like, I'm not like Jews. Yeah.
But there's a lot of people that are like that.
I agree,
right?
but that's because humans are tribal, which
But
is what we're talking about.
Yeah, we're tribal, and and it's and I think I talked to you about the tribal thing, but there's an ethnic. And it's disappearing from New York. When I came to New York, there was very much kind of like, what are you?
Yeah.
What are you, a Jew? Are you an Italian? What are you? And obviously,
now that's called profiling.
Obviously, I'm both of those.
Ah.
But so I was immediately Midwestern. All I wanted to do when I was a kid was get out of Indiana, and moving to New York made me, it made me realize how Midwestern I am. But it also. That was my identity. That's why my stand-up ended up being about being pale and about Indiana. Which I think some of that is, that is the environment, being a product of your environment.
Definitely.
And that's why I think alternative clubs or rooms are important, because you are a product of your environment. And if you're performing in front of people that have an artistic bent, they're going to encourage you to be more creative.
Yeah, and take chances. And I think that's the kind of thing that pays off with enough craft as well.
Yeah.
All right, folks, that was part 1 of my conversation with Jim Gaffigan. I encourage you to check out part 2. It is a very different conversation, and it gets a little tense, but not in a bad way, but, a little tense. I recommend it. It's super cool. I will talk to you soon, either over there or on next week's podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Malignant Brain Humor, folks. Take it easy.
Close your eyes and shut your mouth. Get your ass up off the couch. Let yourself be entertained by the noises in your brain. Something isn't right in your head. Maybe it's a mad, mad world. Instead, you've got a